Well, I'm so excited to be talking now with Josh Mankiewicz from Dateline. I learned from Josh at CrimeCon that it's no longer Dateline NBC, by the way. It's just Dateline because it airs all over the place and has become this massive true crime podcasts and episodes. You're doing it all, Josh. How do you keep it all straight?
Yes, with one caveat, which is the program that's on television is now just called Dateline and not Dateline NBC. But if you want to reach out to us on social media, wherever, it's still at Dateline NBC.
Okay.
Because, for example, on Twitter, at Dateline is some British dating service. Uh, and they get a lot of our messages.
Right. Right. Well, tell us, I want to talk about Dateline and kind of how you got involved in Dateline. But first, the podcast that's coming out, I believe it's out now. It came out a few days ago, has
It is out.
Some Idaho ties. And so our
Yes.
viewing audience might be interested. Tell me about this story.
Well, this is season 3 of our podcast, Missing in America, which is 6 separate missing persons cases, each one of which I think is going to break your heart. One of them is an Idaho case, but there's 6 in all, and which means 6 chances to jog someone's memory and maybe give those families the answers that they have been waiting for, in some cases for a very long time, and in some cases for less than a year. But you've got families out there who are really desperate for answers, and this podcast sort of offers the opportunity for the audience to maybe provide the crucial piece of information, which would be great. I would love it if one of these podcast segments unlocked one of those mysteries.
Right. Okay. So what's the Idaho story?
The Idaho story is the story of Terrence Woods Jr., a guy who was a production assistant on a film crew, sort of a reality film crew, not a news crew. He went missing in, I think, October of 2018, when something very strange happened. Now, some of the cases that we're doing are people who have been perhaps abducted. Some of the cases we're doing are cases in which the people are probably dead or quite possibly dead, but the murder investigation hasn't started yet because the body hasn't been found. There's no way to tell which of those we're talking about, but that's certainly, those two options certainly do encompass a huge number of missing cases, people who are either abducted or people who have already been killed and their body hasn't been found. But there's a third category of people who are missing and it's just not really clear what happened. And that is the Terrence Woods Jr. story. The story that the film crew tells is that while they were filming, at the end of a day, suddenly he just drops his gear. He had a belt with like a radio and some other stuff on it, and he runs off down the side of a mountain where they're filming in the Grangeville area. And this is very steep, very dangerous terrain. It's almost dark. He's running at top speed. They sort of try to chase after him. They're like, "What are you doing? Where are you going? Why are you doing that?" But he runs away from them, and they've never seen him since. The next couple of days, the crew members say that they searched for him that night. They looked around, they couldn't find him. They're calling to him, no answer. The next day, there's a very significant search by the local sheriff's office, and then later by a lot of volunteers and choppers and dogs and a tracker. And no one has ever found hide nor hair of Terrence Woods Jr. Now, his father, who lives outside Washington, D.C., thinks that there is something wrong with the official story. He's never really believed that. But exactly where the truth lies is kind of hard to figure in this, since we don't know what happened. There's a lot of abandoned mines up there. In fact, abandoned mines were the topic of the show that he was working on when Terrence Woods went missing. They were doing a thing called Dave Turin's Lost Mine. This was a TV crew from Britain that they'd hired him to work on, and so it's possible that he fell into one of these abandoned mines, because they're not all perfectly well marked, and they're up there in the mountains, and there's vents to the mines that people can fall into. Obviously, there's a lot of predators up there, a lot of animals that can kill you. That's possible. It's possible, I guess, that he figured out some way off the mountain, that he had a ride arranged. We don't know what happened. We do know that the film crew says that he was acting strangely. Terrence was the day that he disappeared. Uh, their claim is that he had an anxiety attack that morning, which no one who knows him says was common. His father doesn't say that. People who know him, people who've worked with him, didn't say that. But the film crew said that he had an anxiety attack that morning. And he also apparently told the film crew that he had to leave the shoot early because his mom was having surgery. And that wasn't true. She
Hmm.
was not having surgery. So exactly what was going on, we don't know.
Yeah.
This
I,
doesn't feel like an abduction or a crime like some of the other ones do. I guess it
right.
could be. It just feels like a great big question mark.
Right. I remember when this happened. I think most of our viewers might, because it was so weird, but also in a really remote area of Idaho. And then it just kind of dropped off the radar. The story just kind of dropped off the radar. So I'm glad
Well,
you're bringing it back.
yeah, I mean, it happened in late 2018, and it just sort of, I mean, they looked, and I don't think they're actively looking now, even though they're actively classifying the case as, they classify the case as, active and open and,
Right.
and unsolved. But I don't think anybody's searching for them today or tomorrow, for example. But yeah, and I think I think it dropped off the radar screen of everybody up there because they didn't find him. They didn't find any proof that he had gotten away. They didn't find any proof that he was there and dead. They didn't find anything.
Well, it's so good, as I mentioned, that you're bringing this back into the light, and hopefully there can be some answers that come from it. I would imagine there's been other stories that you've covered in your career, especially on Dateline, doing these crime shows, where once there is some publicity, answers do come.
Yeah, I mean, we've done stories in which the fact that there is a Dateline story in the works has unearthed a little bit of information. Now, that doesn't happen very often. Most of the time, Dateline stories are stories that have already been adjudicated because when we're telling TV stories, the audience wants an ending. So usually by the time we tell a story, the the person who was accused has either been found guilty or they've been acquitted, but there is an end to the story. So
Right.
it's not like we're in the process of sort of unearthing a lot of information. There are times when people come forward and they want to talk to us and they haven't spoken with police. A number of times I've spoken with defendants who had invoked their right to counsel and had not spoken with police or investigators, but they do talk to Dateline because they want to get their story out. That's happened a few times.
I saw a few weeks ago on the television version, you were interviewing an inmate in a facility. I don't remember the specific show, but it was through Glass. You were talking with them. Do those type of situations make you nervous at all? Or I'm sure it's a little bit of excitement when you get to go into a prison and talk with an inmate. And how do you know whether the person's, completely telling you the truth? You kind of have your BS meter on to try to get answers out of them?
I mean, look, you're a reporter. Your BS meter is supposed to be on all the time. I mean,
Right.
you're pretty good chance you're not getting the straight story from anybody involved, which is why you have to challenge everybody in these stories. Not not just the bad guy. You have to challenge your sympathetic characters and investigators and family members, everybody. Uh, and that's sort of how you get the best version of the story, or at least the maybe the truest version of the story. I never worry about going into prisons to talk to inmates, with one exception, which is that there is usually a time limit, which we don't always have in other interviews. Like if I sit down to talk to a prosecutor, they don't say I'm here for exactly an hour, and then the blue screen of death approaches. Like you can generally ask as many questions as you want. Ditto the police, ditto families. Uh, in prisons, they have all kinds of rules and times much more regimented. And so frequently they'll say, once you set up and we start, you have exactly 30 minutes or you have exactly an hour. And a lot of prisons sort of really adhere to that. And that makes the questioning more difficult. Um, so when somebody starts filibustering, it's a bigger deal than it is in an interview that doesn't have a time limit. So I never really worry about my safety. There's almost always corrections officers there. Frequently, these inmates are shackled out of camera range, uh, and when these guys sit down with us on Dateline, they're on their best behavior. They're not showing the side of them that got them in there. They're showing the side of them that they want to show.
Right.
And their story is always getting them off the hook,
Right.
which is fine. I'm prepared to listen to that. I'll listen to your story about how this isn't you. You're not really a killer. Your ex-wife's family and the cops are all kind of in league to put you away. It's all a great big conspiracy. Fine. You want to float that? I'll listen to that. That doesn't mean that I will not have read everything about the case and that I will not be ready to poke some holes in that argument, because the audience is kind of waiting for that when we sit down with these guys. But yeah, I never worry about interviewing these guys behind bars. First of all, a lot of times they're literally separated from us by a pane of glass, in which case there isn't any contact anyway. But even when they're, right across the way from us, I generally don't worry. It really hasn't been a problem.
Now, Josh, did you get hired for Dateline, or did you originally start at like NBC as a general assignment reporter and then they pulled you over? How did that work?
No, I joined as a Dateline correspondent in 1995.
95.
So February be 30 years here.
Wow.
I had I had come from a news magazine show on Fox that did not succeed. It was only on, I don't even think it was on for a full year, called Front Page. I did that. And before that, I had been a local reporter in Los Angeles and New York City. And I'd been a network correspondent for ABC, a general assignment correspondent. So I'd done I sort of done network general assignment, and I'd done local news for a while. And then I went to that Fox program, and then I came to Dateline.
And at the time,
But when
Dateline was.
when
Oh, go ahead.
that's what I was about to say. The same thing. Yeah, yeah. At the time, Dateline was not was not doing crime stories, or we certainly weren't doing hour-long crime stories or 2-hour-long crime stories the way we do now. We were doing all kinds of different stories, 4, 5, 6 stories sometimes in an hour, and we were on like twice a week, 3 times a week, 4 times a week, at one time 5 times a week.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we were doing lots of different shorter stories. Then in about 2005 is when we started making the turn to crime.
And what did you think about that coming from? I'm sure you did consumer type of stories
Oops,
or
you
maybe
froze.
celebrity interviews and now
You
all
froze.
crime. What'd you think?
Say that one more time.
What did you think when
Say
they
that.
just
I didn't hear.
oh what did you think when they kind of made the format change from the 4 or 5 different stories per episode to we're going to focus on pretty much all crime and in depth?
I was not terribly interested in that. Um, you know, when you start in journalism, you're generally covering the cops. That's frequently one of the first beats that you do. And I thought, well, I kind of already did this. I don't really want to go back to being on the police beat. I'd been a political reporter, and now I was at Dateline, which was great. And I liked covering all those different kinds of stories. I still miss that sometimes. But what I did not see coming was that, one, I was going to enjoy this, which I do. And second, that it was going to connect with the audience in a way that all kinds of other things I'd covered didn't. I'm glad we did that, and I'm glad I kind of gave it a chance, because at the beginning I was like, oh, I'm not really not very interested in that. And Keith Morrison said to me, they really want you to do this. Actually, what he said was, they really want you to do this. um, and so I did.
Well, and Keith was a good judgment of what was coming then. And to think it was in 2005 when really, when did the whole true crime, Dateline says the original true crime,
Right.
right?
Yeah. I mean, look, I mean, first of all, Keith is always right. That's a good rule to keep in mind here at Dateline. Just a little perspective. True Detective magazine, about the terrible crimes in the world and the dogged detectives that solve them, that was first published in 1924. So that'd be 100 years of true crime journalism. So this is not brand new. This is not some new trend. This has been around for a long time, and I don't think it's going away. What's different is that there are so many more ways to consume the product. You don't have to go to your newsstand anymore. You don't have to wait for that magazine. You don't have to wait for the mailman. Now, it's on TV. and it's on podcasts, and it's streaming. I mean, you can consume Dateline, and it's in syndication. You can consume Dateline so many ways now, and people do. I mean, we produce these television programs laboriously, expensively, that air on Friday nights at 9 o'clock Eastern on NBC. You'll see how I slipped a little plug in there.
Plug away.
Yeah, thank you. And a little something extra in my paycheck this week, I think. And but I think the number of people who are like sitting there watching it live, I mean, I think that's definitely diminished over the years. But there's all these other ways that people are getting it. So sometimes I talk with people who listen to the podcast, listen to the audio of our TV show, like the next day or over the weekend in podcast form, because it fits their life better, because they're working at home, or they're doing laundry, or they're taking a walk, or they're out with the dog, or whatever, on a long drive. And I'm like, okay, well, what about the pictures that we spent so much time on? And they're like, well, I mean, sometimes I go back and I want to see what people look like, so I watch the episode again on TV, or I stream it on Peacock. I'm like, okay. I mean, then we have these other podcasts like Missing in America, and like a couple of the ones that Keith and I have done that are done expressly for podcast audiences. They were not originally TV stories. They are done differently for podcast audiences. Those also do very well. And then we have Andrea's weekly podcast called the Dateline True Crime Weekly, which like brings you up to date on all true crime news, not just the stuff that we're covering on Dateline. So right. If you're interested in true crime, and clearly you are, there's a lot of different ways to get it now.
Right. And if you look at the charts, those Dateline podcasts are normally 1, 2, 3 overall, not just in the true crime category, but overall.
Look, we're really lucky, and we sort of have an advantage here, which I think we are pressing. True crime is a giant part of the podcast world. Dateline has the biggest name in true crime. And so I'm glad that we're doing this, because we are reaching a lot of people who clearly want more, and we're giving them more.
So what do you foresee for the future? You got any big projects coming up, Josh?
I have an original podcast not done for a TV first, that will air in the fall. I can't say anything more about that yet, because we're in the very early stages of putting this together, but it takes about 3 months to do.
Right.
I'm also at work right now on 5 television stories.
5. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I'm here. I'm hitting the road soon. I've been on the road the last couple of weeks on different stories. So yeah, they're, while NBC is doing the Olympics, we are sprinting from one end of the country to the other.
Well, I have to say, for the viewers, we had a big story here locally, the Daybell case, for the past 4 years, and all the big networks and documentary companies and everybody came to town. NBC Dateline was by far, at least in our experience, the most professional to work with, nice. Didn't a lot of times these networks come in and try to squish the little guy out and take over.
Right.
Not the case with a Dateline, and of course Shane, the producer, and Vince and Keith, of course. So
that doesn't surprise me at all, because Shane and Vince and Keith are consummate professionals. Also, they understand something that maybe other networks don't understand, which is that the little guy you were talking about, that would be like you or local news reporters, like they understand the story in a way that we won't, and they have a connection to that community in a way that we don't. So we're always relying on people like that, not just in the Daybell story, but on Dateline stories all across the country, because people like you understand the community, the players, the story in ways better than we will, and in a different way than we will. So I'm glad to hear that, but it doesn't surprise me at all that Dateline.
I can't forget Dave Ketterling either, who I think you see a lot. Dave down there in LA.
I do see him a lot. In fact, Dave and I are partners on a huge story here in California that is completely ready. It is ready to go. We have shot it, written it, edited it. Dave did both of those things, both the writing and the editing. We wrote it together, but he edited it, and it hasn't gone yet. They've also shot part of it. It hasn't gone yet because the defendants haven't been sentenced. Now, I know what sentence they're going to get, but it hasn't actually been pronounced yet. And it's been delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed. And so it's going to run sometime in the fall when these guys finally get sentenced. But that's going to be my next story, is the story with Dave Ketterling, which is it is ready to go as soon as these guys get sentenced.
Nice. Okay, good. There's the tease for everybody in the audience
There you
to
go.
watch for that show. All right, Josh, anything you want to add?
Just that our association with you has been hugely to Dateline's advantage. And so I just want to thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. And we want to let everybody know, Missing in America, you can find it now wherever you get your podcasts. And it's good stuff, especially with that Idaho tie. And hopefully they can get some answers in finding that filmmaker who was here and vanished.
That would be great. Yeah, Missing America is available wherever Missing America is available wherever you get your podcast. Dateline Missing in America, and if you're tired of hearing ads, you can subscribe to Dateline Premium, and you will never hear an ad again.
Hey, there you go. Cool. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, sir. Nice to see you.